Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're going to be taking a look at Humankind's latest patch note. The patch came out 4 days ago as of recording, and by the time this video goes live, it should be around 5 days, hoping to get this out tomorrow. And this is the Fabius Maximus patch that has been promised for a while, and it was delayed a little bit, but now it's out live. Patch 1.0.5.517 for the actual version note. And a lot of things have changed. Finally, some balance changes to a lot of the culture. And we're still in the early stages of the game since we are not even patch 1.1 yet. We're still in the post-launch kind of series of patches to fix things up. We're going to run through some of these changes, not all of them, obviously, especially the ones that are just bug fixes. But to start things off, this is a nice little added option to the game. Now that when we start a game, we can pick how many strategic and luxury resources we want to spawn in the world, whereas previously it was preset according to your map size. So you couldn't have all the luxuries, for example, unless you played on huge. There's 20 of them in total. So this is a little nice change. Random AI persona, also pretty nice, because they do play out a little bit differently. So sometimes I feel like I'm cheating a little bit setting up the game if I end up picking a more passive AI. Now I can just randomize that. New illustrations for common units shared among all different cultures. That's just nice to see. And now we have a monthly challenge. This brings us to our next Let's Play actually on the channel. There is a series of challenges for this month's Dela de los Montes event. And there's 3 challenges, I believe, that can get you your special avatar to celebrate this Mexican holiday. And I believe one of the most interesting one is 300 population in one of your city, which I think is actually pretty difficult to do unless you plan it out. I mean, the easiest solution I can think of is multiple cities where you get your population close to 300, like 100 plus, because population is limited by, maximum 1 population gain per city per turn. Even if you have enough food to push, let's say, 2 population, you will still only gain 1. So in a normal pace game of 300 turns, if you just do the passive growth, it's almost impossible to get 300 population in a city. Of course, if you play agrarian affinity cultures, you have the ability to steal population from nearby territories and other factions. You can also steal population with the ramsack ability from a civic, and obviously you can donate population over by building units in one city and then sending them to another city to disband, or just absorbing cities together. So there's a ton of ways to work around this system, obviously, but getting a city to 300 population and sustaining that is actually going to be an interesting challenge. And then the other 2 are also quite challenging in different ways. One is to have every empire on the map call you the religious leader. So a lot of early game holy sites, perhaps. And the final one is conduct 20 festivals, the public works event, basically costs a bit of production, as the Mexican culture, since we are celebrating a Mexican holiday. So I might do a Let's Play where we kind of round all 3 challenges into one, just so that we can also unlock this kind of time-restricted challenge. It only works for this month to get your own avatar. Anyhow, mod support is coming into the game. There are changes to AI difficulty scaling. They don't actually detail exactly how much the change is, but I assume they're trying to make late game AI a bit stronger because it's quite easy for human players to snowball out of hand, especially since the AI's bonus, especially since it's, flatter. It's stronger in the early game, but definitely falls off as the game progresses. Then we come up with this one. This is actually a super interesting change. I think this is actually going to make rushing 2 cities kind of the best way to play the game, because main plaza influence output is doubled now. So that means each city you have is going to net you 6 points of influence rather than 3 points. And even when it was 3 points, I could have made an argument that getting 2 cities out as fast as possible is definitely the most ideal way to play the game. Because if you think about it, you can claim your outpost in the Neolithic for 5 influence and 20 influence for a total of 25. and getting your 2 early city spot claimed that way was the most efficient way to approach the game. And then once you exit the Neolithic into the Ancient Era, you pop one of those for a free evolution, and then you start producing passive influence from that city, as well as from population that you could have in both of those outposts or city locations. And then you want to spend your first, I believe, 160 influence to evolve your second city, and then start attaching. Simply because attaching territories to existing cities is not that beneficial in terms of generating influence. So you're kind of slowing down your production and everything if you don't get your second city up as quickly as you can. And now with extra influence to boost on those cities, it's definitely better to get your second city ready right off the bat. And you can probably even get a third city now, because by being one over your city cap, the punishment is minus 10 points of influence. So your new city is passively going to give you at least 6. And with one infrastructure building, the first one, I forgot what it's called, but I believe it's 4 points of pottery, I think. You get 4 points. So that cancels out any potential negative punishment for you for having that first or extra city, right? Going 3 cities early on is kind of neutralized by this change. So I feel like this is a big one. I don't know if it's well thought of, like, with the penalty to extra cities being an influence penalty, now you're gaining more influence for extra cities. So being one above the limit seems to be the optimum way to play. And that just feels like slightly bad design, just because, why have a reward for going over something that's called a limit? Anyhow, you wouldn't want to go, 2 over, because that punishment, I believe, is like 110 points of influence. But going 1 over is definitely the optimized way to play before this change, and definitely after this change. Lower influence in population for some late game tech, not a big deal, just because it's late game. You're not really going to, influence does scale quite crazy in the game with how much things cost in the late game for absorbing cities, for attaching territories. So this will definitely slow you down a bit, but it's not going to be a huge amount, right? How much population are you really going to have? You might lose perhaps 100, 200 points per turn from these technology, but by the time you reach these technology, like I said, the game is ready quite late, and it's not really going to make a huge difference in terms of your winning or losing the game, but perhaps might make certain moves like picking up a couple late game civics or absorbing a couple cities a bit more difficult. And speaking of civics, they are going to modify the cost to make it scale faster with the amount of enacted civics, so it makes picking up civics even harder. I think this just forces players to end up adopting civics of their neighbors, because you do have that neighboring adaptation events where you can pick up free civics that are aligned with your neighbor's civics choices for no influence. So this definitely forces that type of gameplay, even though it might not be optimum, but perhaps, either civic choice might be beneficial for you, and that might be the way to go. It also probably makes certain culture like the Ming with their legacy trait, which reduces a flat percentage amount of cost for civic adoption, as well as certain technology that provides that bonus, a lot better. Simply because if civics are going to be a lot more costly, it's going to cost a lot more, a lot faster, because it scales with the number of civics you have enacted. In the late game, you might want to pick those particular cultures to kind of counteract this if you do plan on picking up some late game civics to help your gameplay. Aztec empires can spend money on, say, propaganda in order to push back for influence or increase their prestige, similar to what they originally could do in terms of pushing back for influence. I don't know if this is actually particularly important, but nice to see that they get more options with uses of money. I believe money is getting quite a few balance changes in terms of how effective it is, and I think it's going to become a lot more effective. I think they're scaling back a lot of the building rush costs so that it's a lot more doable, but hopefully we'll see that in the list down below. Improve local pollution effect. So basically we can see what the actual local pollution effect is in terms of losing yield on your tiles. This is just a bug Lake Macau was free to move through. You can literally move 3 tiles and then pop out on the other side for no cost. Now it will cost 1. There are new improved shamanism tenant choices. I hate it when it says something like this and you don't know exactly what the changes are, but I guess we'll see in game, especially if we're going after the religious leader challenge for this month. The number of territories needed for Expansionist Star has been modified to kind of depend on the size of the map, which I think is definitely important because if you play on a small map and they want to expand like 20 something times when you are in the later eras, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's going to scale according to the size of the map. And the only thing that they're going to keep the same is the Era Star goals will be the same for the Ancient Era, no matter the size of the map, which I think is fair because no matter the size of the map, your number of competitors should stay relatively the same, and your early expansion should be kind of available in equal amounts for whatever map size you're playing. I mean, the only thing you can do is take away competitors, giving yourself more early game land. You can't overload a map with more competitor than it's designed for. All right, now we're getting to the really juicy stuff, the culture balancing or rebalancing. Turks finally got the nerf. The 300% adjacent research quarter bonus is now only 5%. This is now correctly set because there's no way 300%. Like the difference is so massive. It's kind of cool to see that this is finally fixed and the Turks is no longer the most broken culture in the contemporary era. It is still kind of weird because they are agrarian and they have a science building as their unique building that generates still quite a bit of science. And I always kind of found that a little bit odd with a lot of the culture design where your building does not correlate to your actual affinity. Anyhow, it also generates 1 science per food workplace instead of 1 science per city population. I think the game is getting rid of a lot of the population bonuses, like 1 science per population or 1 food per population, etc., simply because it scales a little bit too strong, since your city can build as many emblematic as you have territories. So let's assume your city has X territories. You can have X copies of your emblematic district, and each one, if it scales with population in the same city, you're essentially multiplying your city population by your territory size to get whatever amount of resource you're getting, and that scales just a little bit too well. Now it's per food workplace, so I guess this is the food, like the farmers job slots, right? Instead of saying everyone in the city, it's how many farmer positions you have, the farmer workers, right? The food workers in your city. So it depends on your infrastructure. It depends on how many regular farming quarter you have. And that kind of makes more sense given that we just mentioned the Turk being agrarian, kind of, pushes you to build a bit more farming quarters to kind of boost science. The French, always a very special culture because the +1 era is only really beneficial when you pick a science affinity culture when you're in the industrial era, because if you pick it in contemporary, there is no extra era to research, which made the French very strong for rushing late game tech. Now, their emblematic district, which I believe has to do with the World Fair, is changing their per population bonus. Like I mentioned before, they're trying to get rid of this, but you still have it, but it only activates when you put the city in science mode. Now, science mode is when you are a science affinity culture, and the ability is to change all your production and money into science for the next at least 5 turns, and pretty much means your city cannot build anything, but it helps you with research. And this means when you turn that on, your emblematic district will now apply the science per population. This is rather weird. I think this is them trying to compromise, and it will bring up a lot of issues. For example, if I pick the French and I build a bunch of my emblematic districts, but then when I move on to the contemporary era, I don't pick the Swiss or the Sweden, Japan, I believe those are the two science affinity cultures in the contemporary. Basically, if I don't pick another science affinity, I cannot turn cities into science mode, and the value of my emblematic district becomes a lot worse when I move on from the contemporary into the contemporary era. I could always, transcend as the French, but it is limiting. Then the Huns and the Mongols with the horde armies. They're increasing the production cost of raising a 4-unit horde to match the cost of 4x production of a single unit. I think this really has to do with the fact that you could summon these, 4-unit hordes from your outpost with influence, I believe, and it was a lot cheaper. Now, they also will up the cost of the resource, 2 horses instead of 1. Now, this change here is probably gonna hurt the Han and Mongols a lot more because it's actually kind of hard to find, 2 of the same strategic resource before you expand out, especially in the early game. However, it probably pushes either players or AI factions into more trade. That way you can gain these strategic resources from other cultures around you, improve your relationship, and build out your horde that way. Now, there is something, though, in that if you do have a horde unit already, you can grow it passively through war rather than, always holding on to 2 horses. Because as long as you have 1, you can kind of spawn it into as many as you want, given that you keep winning battles with them. Now, moving on, Harappans, another early game powerhouse, lowered emblematic district adjacency bonus to 2 per food district was 3. Not a massive penalty. This probably hurts you more in the late game because in the ancient era, you're not going to have time to build a lot of food districts, farming quarters, basically, around your unique emblematic district. You barely have enough time to build, enough of your emblematic district before you should really move on to the next era. Harappan's power, I think, comes from the fact that they just passively boost food on tiles that produce food. They're very good, on rivers. They're very good with rivers. In particular, their emblematic district will also count as a river, which is their real strength, in my opinion, because river bonuses from infrastructure just becomes very, very powerful into the game. Then we have the Khmer. Remove 1 industry per population, a common trend as we are noticing. On the emblematic district, the Barrays, or the Barai, and it's getting changed. So instead of losing, all your industry production from that building for the bonus, it's now encouraging you to build your barai next to rivers because you get +4 industry per adjacent river. This is how you want to build your barai anyways. They're essentially a food and industry exploiting, district. Picking up all the tiles around adjacent rivers is very important for them, because you can kind of get both the infrastructure bonuses from things like the industry boosting ones, like water mills and so forth, as well as the food boosting ones. River yield naturally is very, very high. I almost never build any districts on existing rivers. Want to plant forests on them, pick up a forest tenant for extra production. They can, be powerhouse in terms of what yield they provide. So Barai was always kind of playing that role for me. Obviously, in the late game, we have huge population numbers. The Barai is going to do a lot worse because now the maximum amount you can get, I want to say it's not exactly 24, because if you have, I guess it could be maximum amount 24, right? But how many river locations are you going to find where you have a perfect tile surrounded by rivers on all surrounding areas? So it's also going to be pretty map dependent for this bonus. The Franks. The Scriptorium synergy bonus now only applies for adjacent research quarters instead of all districts. This will hurt them a bit, but I don't think it matters too much. Phoenicians' legacy trait now includes a -25% research cost for fishing and sailing. They're trying to strengthen the early game. I guess this will be a naval culture. But I think the issue is mainly, do you have water on the map? If you don't have a lot of water on the map, you're not going to pick the Phoenicians. And if there are a lot of water on the map, then I guess it's nice you're getting a small savings for fishing and sailing. It's not a huge saving. 25%, at this point amounts to about, a few turn worth of research, depending on how much, science you have. So there are going to be variations on this. Romans also trying to boost their legacy trait with a bit of research cost reduction on Imperial Power. Now, Imperial Power is a pretty nice technology to rush because of the deed on it. You get a little bit of fame for being the first one to get Imperial Power. But my issue with the Romans has always been their emblematic district is really bad, and I don't know if this will convince me to pick them. Anyhow, moving on to a bit of balancing to the time before cultures, the Neolithic era, they are really nerfing the food layer food gain. So when you spend a turn to get rid of a lair, or safe haven, whichever one, you're only getting 5 food instead of 20. So it's no longer automatic population up. This will slow down the growth star that you pick up, but most importantly, you might not want to spend a turn to reduce food layer. Unless your turn, like your movement happened to end on the layer at the end of turn, then why say no to 5 food? But it is still a very significant nerf. Mammoth are getting stronger to 14 points. This is probably good because AI combat for animals is that they always attack you, so you always could just put your unit in defense and just kind of watch them kill themselves with 2 extra points of combat strength for you. So this is a good change. Then comes the nerf that I really don't like. So scouts, Harappan runners, and scout cavalry have their upkeep increased from 0 to 1. And to compensate, the next change is you will start out with a 5 money buffer to unit upkeep to give players breathing room in the ancient era. So essentially, if you get 5 scouts when you move into the ancient era, that's free. The buffer will be on just unit upkeep, so it's not free money if you get less. But essentially, this prevents you from amassing a huge amount of nomadic parties during the Neolithic by not moving on, and then pumping those units to kind of rush down enemies. But I still have to say, if you can get a lot of population in the Neolithic without dragging the game on too long, it's still a great thing. What you want to do is then just pump those units into population once you get into the ancient era, and it will be free for you. You can keep 5 of them to run around without hurting your early game economy. This is kind of alternative way of preventing a certain exploit being used in terms of just rushing massive amount of units in the Neolithic. But interesting approach. I don't hate it. I don't think this is the best way to do it. Civic balancing, scientific fact. Oh, these are very minor things. I don't think I'm going to go over all of them in detail. But I think the key here is you now get 1 extra holy site as the prerequisite. They really should, spell out all of these. But even if you hit the prerequisite, sometimes the civic doesn't fire, which is a bit annoying. Then religious minorities raises stability bonus for foreign influence in territory to 10. I mean, if you're losing the religious game, this will definitely help you. 10 points gives you about half of the attached territory, because each territory, I believe, is 20 points. Slaves, war slave gives bonus influence and production on military districts, nuclear weapons, changes war support, making it harder for people to accumulate war support against you, and also a 10% fame boost. Ooh, this is actually good if you go for nuclear disarmament. Interesting. I mean, fame is just incredibly important in the game, so anytime you see a 10% boost, that is massive. I wonder if this is also retroactive, like a legacy trait, because that will make this incredibly powerful. Cultural blessing adds some influence on all cities and administrative center, or a big amount on the assimilated people of city and... Okay. So this has to do with the independent camps, assimilated people cities, right? I mean, it's hard to judge because this is bigger amount. It's like, what is the sum and what is bigger amount? Artistic expression, change the effect of unlock infrastructure to be per adjacency instead of flat. Huh. I actually don't know what this is talking about. I mean, I don't know the civics well enough, but okay. Press freedom now either slows down, hastens the speed of stability, changes on all city. Ooh, this is going to be interesting. What this means is every turn, the maximum you can change in terms of stability is 5%. This is good and bad, right? If you have a very unstable setup, but you saved up a bunch of stability, you have a bunch of turns before it drops below 30%. But if you're trying to fix things, it can only go so fast. So now you can have a setup where it either halts your loss of stability, right, slowing it down, or increase the speed you can try to fix things, which is quite interesting. So if you're confident that your stability is fine, and you want to just newly conquer city, recover a bit faster, this might be an interesting way to go about it. Political entitlement, StarCross C now provide +1 combat strength on emblematic units. I think this is always something that should be rewarded. Emblematic units should just be a bit stronger to kind of encourage you from using them. Political influence now provide cost reduction either for emblematic districts, units, or cultural wonders. Don't know the exact numbers, so no idea how powerful this is. Monarchy power choice now provide buyout cost reduction either for units or districts. Once again, also no numbers provided. Late stage snowball slowdown. So this is a couple changes I really don't like. First, reinforce the strength of the quadratic growth portion of the population consumption. So basically how much food your population eat, it's going to be more and more. And lower the linear cost increase. So when you have a small number, the base increase is going to be slowed down. But when the number gets bigger and bigger, they're going to eat a lot more, which is logically doesn't make any sense to me. Having X amount of population versus 2x doesn't mean the food should scale quadratically, in my opinion. But for the game purposes, they're going to do this, which is fine, I guess. Added a second exponential factor to grow district construction costs faster when reaching higher numbers. This is also interesting because this takes into consideration how many districts you have, and the more district you have, the more expensive it's going to be to construct them. I wonder if this is a per city factor, because if it is, and you do have an issue of reaching really, really high numbers, would it be not better to actually split your cities and then absorb them after you're done with the district construction? Because then you bypass this second exponential factor to the growth cost. But early game district is kind of cheap, and it also would play into strengthening certain cultures like Egyptians. 10% decrease on whatever this new cost is going to be better if it's going to cost more. Same as going for things like the pyramid, which will reduce all district cost going forward as well. So those are going to be a little bit stronger on this patch. Apply a different scaling factor based on ready research technology on tech tier costs for medieval era and above. So techs or technologies are also going to be harder to research once you move past the medieval era based on how many you already researched, which I don't know if it's the best way to do things, because it now encourages you to know exactly what you want for your culture, and you want to rush it deep into the research tree. You don't want to go wide, because if you are not planning to go, with any sort of naval gameplay, then don't pick up any of those techs, or else it's going to make the things you want more expensive and longer to research. And you could skip things quite easily in the tech tree in the game. The way the prerequisite system works is actually kind of wild in that the lines doesn't always mean exactly the prerequisite. You can just get half of the lines. Like if 2 tech leads into 1 and you have 1/2 of the line, you can research the next one anyways. So this kind of encourages that type of rushing for particular techs and kind of ignoring the wider range of other tech you have. So that's kind of the way this will kind of change the late game snowball, which is kind of what people already do. I think you rush for patronage pretty much all the time, and then you go back, pick up the easy ones to get the star. Now you might not want to go pick up those easy ones because it's going to make more important tech a little bit more costly. Anyhow, unit upkeep allowance, use game speed scaling, so they're going to double things. This is interesting. Like when you play I forgot what the speed is, but there's normal pace and there's the endless pace. I think it's called endless, even though it's 600 turns. Everything is doubled. right? Cost of building a district is doubled. Influence cost is doubled. The amount of food for that one nomadic, gathering party to double to increase the population is also doubled. But unit upkeep was not doubled. So the money scaling could get a little bit crazier when you are playing on endless mode per se. But now it's going to double the unit upkeep. And because they're changing so many things with upkeep, you can now see the money impact of just upkeep much more visibly. Just basically, it will be a separate thing. Remove upkeep reduction for full army. So if you had a full army, you get a small upkeep reduction. That's no longer the case. Then we move into a lot of just bug fixes, which I don't think we're going to go over. I mean, they are things that, plagued our games, in particular with pollution not showing up, nuclear testing breaking our game. Well, not nuclear testing, but just blowing up nuclear weapons on a lot of different enemies or friends at the end game. Anyhow, we're going to bypass these. I believe most of these other fixes are also bug related. Yes, I think so. These are just unintended things that are just fixed. Military, AI. Yeah, I don't think there's going to be anything that is like non-intuitive here. Society, things that are not working, things not showing up. Map editors, not relevant for me. Mac, also not relevant for me. UI, locate event, had no functionality. Okay. Yeah, most of these are just bug fixes, so I don't think we need to cover them. And that's it. That is the patch. Mainly is the balancing aspect that we're really discussing here. They are trying to make an effort into making late game a little bit more exciting, perhaps just a little bit more drawn out a bit, so you don't feel like you're snowballing. But I still think the issue with late game is the AI being much weaker, right? You can outpace them, and once you do, you're just murdering people with tanks, and that's really just no fun sometimes, unless you enjoy that type of massacre. But anyhow, the changes overall are quite nice. There are some much needed culture rebalancing, strong cultures that we have played, Turks, French, Harappans. We have actually played Harappans. I haven't gone Agrarian actually, but Kumar a lot of times. And they're also trying to buff a few of the weaker ones. So we're going to try to test these things out in game, see how things are. And I'm sure they're going to continue to patch the game up. I also want to see the shaman tenant choices. As I mentioned before, we're going to be starting a new Let's Play tomorrow, I believe. And we're going to be doing a population run, sort of. Maybe kind of a peaceful one, peacemongering population growth, to try to get all of the 3 challenges done for this month. And hopefully you guys will enjoy that as well. So until then, bye.